Hey, welcome back. Today's special Shoe and Show episode is a series we're running called Behind the Design, a masterclass with Wilson W. Smith III, powered by Jones and Vining. This series goes beyond the finished product to explore what really does make great footwear: fit, comfort, and of course, performance, and the creative thinking that brings it all together. And that's exactly where Jones and Vining comes in. You know, for decades, they've partnered with the world's leading footwear brands. I mean, all of them, collaborating from product brief to design to production, ensuring perfect fit, comfort, and performance at the highest level. Across this masterclass, we're going to check in with Wilson about his iconic design career as a designer for both Nike and Jordan, the many different athletes that he's designed for that we all know and love, his strong faith in God, and what the future of design is for our industry. So with that being said, let's dive into the conversation. All right, Wilson, thank you for joining me for our third sit-down session as part of our masterclass series around the life and times of Wilson W. Smith III. Can I ask you a couple questions first before we dive into the episode with this is around purpose and your faith? But what does the W stand for? You got double W's. What's going on with that?
Well, you know, I'm actually the third, and the second W is a state, a city, a city you're not far from. You're kind of,
Washington.
Yes, indeed. And the thing I don't quite understand, honestly, is that I'm the third. My dad was born in actually 1919, which is a while ago. I was born in 1957, but I was thinking his dad would have had to have been born, in the 1800s, and I was thinking, how did the Washington part I get, but the Wilson part, President Woodrow Wilson would have been, in the teens or
right.
And so I'm thinking. Anyway, so I don't quite get where they got Wilson Washington Smith. I think the name because that was he was the first. So he must have named him. They must have given him the name Wilson before the president. But the second one is a president, of course.
Yeah, man, that's such a cool name. I mean, I didn't even know. I literally didn't know the answer to that question. Some of the questions I asked you, I do know the answer to, but that one, you learned something new. So the point of our conversation today, Wilson, is to talk about purpose and faith, which are so critical to your life and to your career. You've talked about it on a prior podcast about how the Spirit has driven you in directions from a design perspective. And you talked about it as we talked about your interaction with Michael Jordan, about the fact that you felt led and you had purpose. And so I want to unpack those themes in a little bit more detail. But before we get to that, I have a trivia question for you. Did you know that the word Nike is in the Bible?
Oh, brother, tell me about it.
And the little word, and I've shared this with my kids, John chapter 3, which is one of the most famous chapters in all of Scripture, is a gentleman by the name of Nicodemus. In Greek, is Nike Demos.
Really?
Champion of the people is what his name is. And so the word Nike in the Greek, in the original Greek of the book of John, is in that book. And so it's unbelievable where you find Nike even today. I mean, your brand recognition is off the charts, let me tell you.
It's awesome. That's one of the better definitions of Nike that I've ever heard. Champion of the people. Boy, yeah. That's powerful. When Nike is the winged goddess of victory. That's the name of the headless wing sculpture from that's in the Louvre in Paris.
Yeah.
And so that sculpture is the goddess Nike. But that's how I've always understood it explained, the wing goddess of victory. So to understand that connected to Nicodemus is really fascinating.
And that gets to this conversation, Wilson. There's theology and everything, right? And as a man of faith, you've had a passion and a purpose that has taken you. And we've had conversations both privately and on this format about how you had turns in your career that you weren't expecting, or maybe you didn't even want to take, but you ended up making those decisions to take those chances and feeling like God or the Lord was leading you. And it turned out to be a phenomenal experience and exactly where you needed to be. So let's take a step back and just unpack the purpose and the drive and how faith informs you about your design career. Like how did it lead you these 41 years through your design career to have that purpose and that passion and that faith?
Fun. No, I love that. Awesome, Matt. Well, a couple things I'll say about design and career. For one of the first thoughts that came to my mind, which maybe I'll expound on later, but I really think that design itself is a form of prayer. It's a connection towards inspiration, connection with the Almighty, and almost every artist, even I know I read a quote from Michael Jackson recently where he was saying, really, what you got to do is you got to get out of the way. And he said, what do you do? What do you do when you're design when you're writing? He says, well, I just got to get out of the way and let God come in the room. And I think a lot of artists recognize that kind of almost be still and know that I am God. I mean, there's kind of this moment where you got to make a connection, and you're kind of leading by what you're designing, kind of paying attention to what is really kind of motivating you from the inside. And so you're kind of paying attention to that. There's even another scripture that talks about prayer without ceasing. And and to me, that's just paying attention to your gut, paying attention to the Holy Spirit that's within. And that happened for all of my career. It was like I remember that back in the day, I was trained as an architect. And, I'm trying to remember, somebody shared a scripture with me last night about where it was basically, it's like you, and maybe you can look this up, but it's sure. You can order your steps, but God directs the path or something like that. I need
Proverbs.
Proverbs. Yeah. Something like you order your steps, but God directs the heart of the path or something. But anyway, so man orders the steps, but God.
Proverbs 16:9, the heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps.
Exactly. Thank you, Matt. Well,
is that your story? Is that where we're getting at?
That is what I wanted to get at, is that I feel that I studied architecture in school, mm-hmm. and that was my, and when I was in school, I had no idea that I would end up eventually designing shoes. But the interesting thing is that it's like, God, of course, knew the whole path. And it's like, what I've come to call them is I now call them homes for the feet. I mean, that's my kind of architectural connection to shoes. And that's the experience. But so I think that it definitely is a journey where you're kind of paying attention. I mean, what happened when I came out of school, there was a kind of a leanness in the architectural industry, and I would be working and I'd get laid off after a year and a half. They'd rehire me, lay me off again. And so I was, wasn't really going that well. And my roommate at the time, he said, hey, I called the Nike hotline today because there was no internet. So that's the way you got jobs, was on the phone. But he called the Nike hotline and there was a job doing space planning. And I thought, well, that's interesting. If I go and work with a client, maybe I'll have more sustainable job than working for the, for the firm.
Yeah, it's more stable.
Yeah, a little more stable. So I want to go check it out. Well, I tell you, I went over there and I immediately connected with the corporate architect, a guy named Tinker Hatfield. He was a corporate architect. He's the guy who put up for this job and posted it. And I was like, man, this guy, I really feel this is the kind of person that I would want to work closely with, because I appreciate, almost in a sense, being discipled by him, or I appreciate his sense of design and ability. And so that was kind of where my prayers started pointing towards Nike. Well, it ends up that Nike didn't hire me initially, but I bugged them for 15 months, persistent, knock, that's a scripture, knock and keep on knocking.
That's right.
And eventually the door will open. And
You're in the green pajamas. That's what I want to know. Did you show up in the green pajamas?
I know, exactly. Yeah, I'm sure that I had other green pajamas, but I was knocking and kept on knocking, and I would call Tinker. I'd call him monthly, and he was always nice and cordial. I always thought he was going to just tell me off one time, but he was just kind of, and I would tell something about what I was doing lately, But I think it's important to just keep on knocking. So then eventually Tinker gets hold of me and says, hey, I've got a position that that you could come. And I'm like, oh, great. So, and so that's kind of what happened. But I was going to work for him as a, architectural assistant for Nike. So I'd be doing offices and eventually some store design. And so really some significant things happen along that path. But then all of a sudden, it ends up, boy, here we are 2 or 3 years later. It was I was hired at the end of 83. And so it becomes about the end of 86. Nike's in what they call the sneaker wars with Reebok. And so suddenly the whole look of sneakers and the story of sneakers started really bursting on the scene. I mean, of course, Michael Jordan was signed and the Air Jordan and the colors and the expressions of the Air Jordan in 85 was just a big thing. That movie Air was all about it. And then also Reebok had this amazing women's aerobic shoe, and we kind of missed that market. And they were doing these shoes that all these women loved, this cute little shoe called the Princess. So anyway, so things were happening, and there was a sneaker wars. And so at the time we were going through a major layoff, and I thought, my coworker was let go, and then they called me to the back room, and I thought, oh, well, this is it. And I'm walking back there, and they said to me, how would you like to design shoes? And I was like, oh, I always wanted to design shoes, and I had never even thought about it. I mean, that was really because shoes were, at that point, I was this high-minded architect, and I didn't see shoes, even though I was at a shoe company. I was doing architecture for a shoe company, and so I remember.
Did it feel like a demotion at the time?
Oh boy, it felt like I was diving into the pool and didn't know how to swim. I mean, it just felt like, what am I doing? There's a tidal wave underneath. What am I doing? And so I remember leaving work that day and driving home and going, Lord, what has happened to my career? I wanted to be, Frank Lloyd Black, as opposed to Frank Lloyd Wright.
I want to appreciate this moment for a second. And our viewer, because we're 41 years later or whatever.
Yeah, right.
The fact that you have Wilson Smith, who's designed so many amazing shoes, and this is to our listeners, at a moment in his life, as an encouragement, he was upset and didn't know what he was doing with his career when he was asked to design shoes. That tells you everything you need to know about purpose and faith.
That's all. I mean? It felt like the lowest point at that point in my career. It felt like, what am I doing? What has happened? Because I had such high-minded thoughts about architecture and all of my life. I was 5 years old when I'd be drawing a lot of things, building blocks. My mom says, well, you should become an architect because architects make lots of money. And the thing was that she just didn't want me to be a starving artist. And so I'm like, okay, I'll be an architect. So that was my North Star from then on, even to that point when they said to me, how would you like to design shoes? And I was like, well, yeah, I want to pay the rent. Absolutely. That was my reaction. And then I remember just going home going, what has happened? But that's once again, that scripture you read earlier is that we plan our steps, but God is like creating the path. And God literally is shining a light on the whole footwear industry that I didn't see necessarily at that point, because I was one of the industry was just starting to blossom in mid 86. And so this is happening. And then, and to where today, things like, there's articles that's come out in Footwear News or whatever it says, the first Black designer in the industry, the industry's, Jackie Robinson of design. And I'm like, Jackie Robinson? And I'm thinking, if you want to know the truth, the way I backed into this was not, it didn't feel like that. But that's what kind of shows how, once again, if you're kind of prayerfully trying to go along your path and you with a little bit of humility, there were several steps in my journey along the way. I could name them one after the other where I felt like I was taking the lesser road, or I was going, where was I going? What was I doing? One of the other big ones, the biggest one maybe to express would be, I mentioned earlier about even going into the Jordan brand, because at the time I was like, they said, we want you to be the first designer of the Jordan brand. I was like, Jordan brand. And that was before the Jordan brand became, but at the time I was like, really? This is okay. This is going to, well, I'll go do this for a minute and then who knows where I'll end up. I may get let go again, but then, that blossomed. And then at one point in time, to be honest, this was around 2014 or so, or 2013, I believe. I was at a design leadership group. And basically in that group, they also had DNA, which is the Department of Nike Archives. DNA was under that group, and I said, and so they came to me, and the leader, her name's Angela Snow. Angela Snow is this amazing designer and also amazing leader of Nike Design. And she comes to me and says, I just think DNA needs a little bit of a design face, a little bit of design face. So I was thinking that, I'm going to go to DNA and remodel it, and I was like, I love that project. And she's like, oh, well, hell yeah, And so by the end of the day, she's offering me a job in DNA, or, would this be the opportunity for me to offboard from the company? And so it was kind of, so it's like both of those pages were being set in front of me. And this is, and we were kind of in that place as a company. I was, anyway, it was, and it was the DNA thing was honestly, it didn't change my salary, but it kind of stepped me down in kind of a positional place. And so, and in terms of benefits or whatever else. And so I was kind of like going, wow. And so I could either take this offboarding thing or take that. And so I said, well, I need the weekend to think about it. And I went away and prayed about it. And it was honestly one of those things where I felt like that Sunday, I felt like the Lord really clearly, my spirit was like, well, I haven't told you to leave yet. So, so I'm like, okay, well then I guess I'm staying. And it's not that I'm being negative about DNA, but as being a designer who was working with all these athletes, once again, my high-minded thinking that happened, even when I was an architect and I had a high-minded thought, now I have been working with all these amazing athletes, and now I'm going to work in the archives. And honestly, archives from a design mind, which is trying to think forward, archives felt like, yeah, what's happened to my career? I mean,
did you feel like they're kind of putting you out of pasture, if you will?
Exactly. That was a little bit of the feel. And that's not, but this was, whatever. This was before I even understood what DNA was. And I was, and so I was a little nervous. And I remember when I showed up, a week later or whatever, and I was very honored by the awesome team, but I was just, all I could see was, am I going to be sitting in the corner of the room, scrubbing on a shoe, or what has happened? Yeah,
dusting stuff.
Dusting things on what has happened to my career. But God, I'm trusting this is yet another step, and then the amazing thing was suddenly he shines the light on retro, and retro becomes a thing around 2013, 2014. All of a sudden retro starts getting big. All the shoes I did start coming back to life, like the Air More Up Tempo, suddenly that becomes a big deal in the mid-teens, and they're selling a bunch of them, and then I'm DNA, and I'm basically telling the stories of the company to the company and to influencers when they come to visit. So Drake or Kendrick Lamar or Travis Scott or all the athletes, Devin Booker and who are Serena Nescu would come to DNA, and I'm giving them tours and talking to them about the company and talk about blessing, brother. Let me show you a quick spin off to that.
Hey, pardon the interruption, but I just want to remind you that this special series Behind the Design is powered by our friends at Jones & Vining. They're a trusted partner to footwear brands for materials, engineering, and innovation. You can learn more at jonesandvining.com. That is jonesandvining.com. Yeah.
The DNA piece. Okay, so I'm giving a presentation to Devin Booker at the time. And so Devin Booker, he's there with the brand team, and I'm showing him Nike basketball. I'm showing him the lineage of Jordan and the lineage of Kobe and all these different lines of shoes. And so I asked Devin, I said, what are you feeling? What's your passion? And Devin's like, well, I'm kind of more I love the dunks and I love AF1. And I'm like, wow. And I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of different than what I've been showing you. And, the brand team's there. And we kind of end up going to the other side of the room and we really start hanging out, looking at the dunks and and that becomes kind of the story. So there's kind of more of I feel like there's a connection happening with Devin, and we're helping to kind of formulate. And really the fun thing is when you look at the book or shoe, the book one, it's very influenced by the history and by that, by dunks and that thing. Well, all of a sudden the brand team they go, well, all of a sudden they're like, when they're getting ready to release the book one, they go, okay, well, what are we going to do? And I said, well, book one, well, let's create, I got an idea. Let's create a library on a basketball court. They're like, oh, okay, cool. A library. They're like, well, let me see. Well, we need a librarian. They said, well, what about that guy from DNA?
Owen will do it.
Owen can do it. And so I'm like, and so they come to me. So then I get to be in a Nike commercial that ended up, because of the, was going to just be on the internet, but we were coming up on the release of the shoe during All-Star break. And so they had a spot, a couple spots, 2 or 3 spots during the All-Star game. So All-Star weekend, I'm on a Nike commercial back in 2024, I believe. But anyway.
Last year? That was it? It was last year?
I believe it was last year. Yeah, I think it was 2024. Wow. I'm pretty sure it was 2024. Yeah, it was. But, and that was when it was released. But it's just kind of a amazing, what would I say? God is just like in control of our paths. Mm-hmm. I mean, because I was going into DNA expecting to be sitting in the corner scrubbing shoes, and it was actually ended up being the launch to the next level of athletes that we're working with, of influencers, and even I got to tell the Devin Booker story on TV. So that was really fun.
That's so cool, Wilson. I mean, the thing is, for me, I always go back to God has more in store than you can even imagine for yourself. And so while you're making your plans, aka your steps, like the path is ahead and you have no clue, and it's better if you trust. This is better than you could ever even have imagined.
Exactly.
I have very similar stories of my career, which is different, but the fact is, when you place that trust and you let him lead, he gives good gifts, and he will provide these kind of opportunities. And
I would give a little shout out, Matt. I think the fun thing about who you are is that you don't just do the Capitol Hill journey, but you understand that it's multidimensional, and you make connections in the industry, and you do things like this, and your passion pieces dimensionalize all of who you are, and it goes far beyond. And when God puts you in a place that is far beyond even your regular business, your regular job. And I think that he understands the glove that's going to fit the 5 amazing attributes of who Matt is, or my journey. And so we get to trust that, and we get to flow with that, and just be a part of his path, that you spoke towards.
No, that's so true. Well, let me ask you this. You're outspoken about your faith, and we live in a multicultural, pluralistic society, right, with a lot of different views and competing interests. And some people watch this and think we're talking Greek, and some people think we're crazy, and others will really relate because they have that same trust. So talk to me about being in the Nike world as a Christian, and having that faith and having that purpose. And as you were talking about God shining a light on sneaker culture, I thought to myself, he was reflecting his light off of you, right? Mm-hmm. And that's part of who we are as Christians. So talk to me about living in a multicultural, pluralistic society where not everyone's going to meet us where we're at spiritually, but we clearly have things in common culturally and physically, and and from our jobs perspective. So walk me through that.
Well, one place that what you said that it triggered and made me think was there's a scripture, I believe it's in Revelation, but it says that they overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And the interesting thing is, I don't need to do anything. I just get to tell my story. I get to tell the word of my testimony. I get to just kind of be who God made me to be. I'm not competing with any other philosophies or points of view or whatever, because I think they all came from God's mine anyway. So I mean, to great degree, and I mean, I think there's a variety of values that should be applied to certain points of view. But I do think there's truth in a lot of things. But I do believe in the in the power of Jesus Christ and in the work that he did on the cross for me and forgiveness and everything that I've received from that. And that is where my life flows out of. And that's the joy that I have is relationship with God and prayer for, and just the joy of that. So what I get to do is I get to become all things to all men in the hope to save some, or in the hope to reach people, in the hope to share who I've been made to share as. No, it does not. It gets to be gracious because God's gracious with me, and He's gracious with everybody who's watching this. And it doesn't, because grace and mercy is the only reason any of this is still working. I can't tell you why my heart's beating. I have no idea about any of this stuff. But I get to be a person who's listening, 2 ears, 1 mouth. I get to be a person who's paying attention and hopefully being able to help us all move forward no matter what is going on. What else did I say? I think that I'm just being honest with my testimony. I'm just trying to be honest with these journeys where I felt like, honestly, it's kind of like what I've learned in terms of career moves is if you're here, a lot of times be willing to step down a little bit. And then I come over here and then God will raise it up to another level. And over here, be willing to step down a bit and then God will raise it up even higher. And that's where my career journey has gone. I can point to 6 or 7 times, when it was, they asked me, they said in the 90s, they asked late 80s to 90s, hey, would you like to design tennis or basketball? And they kind of gave me that option. And I was like, let me see, there's something about tennis that felt like an opportunity that I liked. I thought it's kind of, maybe it's an opportunity to kind of tell stories and to work with some people. And I thought maybe honestly, a black guy in the tennis crowd is a little different than a black guy in the basketball crowd. I think I'm more expected. Honestly, I'm certainly, so I'm a little bit of a cliche to tell the truth.
Right.
Just in the basketball world, not that that's, but and even this is really bad. But when I think about my own cultural connection, I remember when I did start doing a few basketball shoes, and one point in time I showed them a picture of Carlton dancing, from the I said that's kind of me. That's kind of me designing basketball shoes. I mean, that's kind of my hipness. Whereas in tennis, I was, I'm just having an objective look at it. I was perceived as probably cooler in the tennis world. And even when I came back to tennis and was working with Serena, the guy who was our tennis marketing director, he said to me, "Oh man, when you came back to tennis, you made tennis cool again."
Oh, that was nice.
I'm like, okay, that's really nice of him to say that. So anyway, I would just say, just have an open opinion about stuff. Don't necessarily take the thing that looks like the most impressive thing. It's like pay attention to the possibilities and kind of pray about them, and don't just do something that you think, oh, the world is going to impress everybody the most. That's not the call. That's not what's going on.
That's a great point. I mean, we talked about in the first episode these 11 axioms, were they maxims?
Maxims, yeah,
maxims. And then it was 5. Well, we've got 2, right? Love the Lord and love others, and that's it. It's simple. That's how I live my life. This is what I want to do, and if people agree with it or don't, I just trust people who I am, and I will always treat everyone with respect and dignity, even if I don't agree with them or they don't agree with me.
Right.
As image bearers, talking about creativity as image bearers of God, right? So for me, I've always just kind of laid that out there. It's who I am, and you take it or leave it. I love you, and off you go if you don't like me. But I've had a lot of success in building quality relationships with people across the aisle, across the spectrum on any kind of cultural touch point. And it hasn't served me wrong to date.
We can all help each other. You know, one of the most, what would they say that, one of the most outreach expressions from Jesus himself was when he was with the woman at the well. And the great thing about that was not only was it against cultural moves for a man to be speaking to a woman at the time, but it was from his particular, what would they say, from his particular nationality to the Samaritan or whatever. And for him to go to her and say, "Can you get me a drink? You know, can you give me a drink at the well?" I mean, that was, yes, he needed a drink of water, you know, and honestly, if that's all that was ever going to come out of it, he was willing to cross over that line and say that to her, "Would you give me a drink of water?" And she was able to, and then she was like, "Wow, who are you, asking me?" She was taken back by it, you know, because it was such crossing so much of a line of cultural lines. And that's what we get to do. We get to recognize the value in everybody and the opportunity for them to give us a drink of water, for them to help us. I mean, it's true. They can. And then eventually, of course, Jesus, you know, meets to her need as well. But the first step a lot of times is to simply recognize that others are at least as valuable as yourself.
That's a great point, which is emblazoned in the Thanks Wilson shoe, the up tempo. Wilson, we took people to church on this one. I appreciate your willingness to have an honest conversation about purpose and faith. To our viewers, I hope you gleaned a lot out of this. If you've been a churchgoer all your life, you probably felt at home with the conversation. If you haven't been, you probably had no idea what we're talking about. But we appreciate you watching and listening and learning because part of this conversation is really shining a light on who Wilson is and what he's brought to the industry for so many years. So Wilson, thank you for hanging out with me again. I really appreciate it. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the special Shoe and Show episode of Behind the Design, a masterclass with Wilson W. Smith III, all powered by Jones & Vining. Throughout this series, we're pulling back the curtain on what it really takes to create great footwear, from creative storytelling to fundamentals of fit, comfort, and performance. And Jones & Vining plays a vital role in that journey. They work behind the scenes to help tons of different brands deliver footwear that looks great, feels right, and performs where it matters most. To learn more about Jones & Vining and how they support footwear innovation from concept to consumer, visit jonesandvining.com. That's jonesandvining.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.